It looks like Verbal Aikido has a theme song. Welcome, everyone, to the Stoa Part 2 in the Mini-Practicum on Verbal Aikido. Luke Archer is here with us again today, the founder or the discoverer of Verbal Aikido, a great interpersonal, intersubjective modality that allows one to receive verbal attacks, which will be the theme today, I think. So how today's going to work, I'm going to tag in Luke, and then he's going to share his screen, and then we'll have a kind of a presentation on today's theme, and then we'll perhaps do some demos or questions. I'll check in with Luke how he'd like that to go down. So that being said, welcome back to the Stoa, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me back, Peter. Yeah, I'm really happy to see so many people again coming back to this for today's session. Yeah, you're right. We're gonna look at more sort of accompanying attack and how to. I think accompanying is the key word for it today. It's the step 2 of the practice. We looked at step 1 last week. We're going to, and sort of logically, step 3 on week 3. So we're going to look at a key activity today. I'm going to sort of give you guys an overview of a little bit sort of more in depth about what we talked about last session. Really look at what we call verbal stretching as key activity today, and hopefully get a little bit of practice on the mat. If we don't get enough time to do really much today, don't worry. Next week, that's where we're going to start throwing insults at each other and throwing each other across the mat. So that's kind of what it's about. Peter, do you have any sort of more shares or anything specifically you'd like to start off with today, or will I just go jump in and share my screen?
Yeah, I think jumping into a screen share would be great. I'm sure questions will emerge afterward.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, excellent. Let's do that. All right. Let's talk about, okay, yeah, sounds good. All right. And here we go. So there's a few more people just arriving. I'm going to let them come in. I think have you got that, Peter? You can.
Yeah, I'll let everyone in.
All right. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, we're going to look at. I guess this is why we do this. So why do we do verbal aikido? And it's just kind of what we've noticed as in terms of posture, what works, what helps, what's a useful habit to have to be able to de-escalate an exchange, to be able to help it go from, again, our ultimate goal is really to get things from a potentially conflictual situation to a conversational energy. So here are the useful postures in conflict. We talked about this a little bit last time. We're going to go a little bit more deep dive on it today. So it's that focus on me. Clearly a key theme of what we talked about. We covered a little bit last week when we talked about that, to help you feel what that was, that sort of getting to that centered yes or that centered no, when being challenged aggressively. That really helps you sort of understand where that is when I'm and you especially know when you're not there, when you're sort of giving an impatient no or a yes. So that clearly a key aspect of the practice of obviously using that space and sort of and helping ourselves sort of expand on the recognition of that space between the stimulus, so what's creating the tension for us, and how we're responding to that, in order to be able to connect with oneself at that moment. Always, again, a key starting point or obligatory pass-through point for any part of practice. So that was what we focused on last week. Again, it's kind of a given for today that all the posture everything that we look at in terms of posture is coming from that place. So what we're going to be looking at today is that focus on the you, getting to the meaning of your partner's expression. So we talk about partner, and now it may sound a bit strange if we're talking about people in a conflict and the person that's challenging you or creating tension for you to see it as a partner. That's, again, it's an Aikido thing, in the sense that we don't sort of see the other person as an adversary, but we see them as a means to practice. So what we're doing with our partner in this case is giving them space to be understood, again, helping them even sometimes they don't even understand what is their communication is really about. And again, giving them a space for that to unfold. And that's what we're going to, like I said, going to be focusing on today. The third part of the practice, just as a reminder, is the us. And that is, of course, exploring potentially harmonious directions. And again, using what you've understood about yourself and what you've understood about the other to go, okay, I know the me, I know the you, now what about this as an us? So that's, again, sort of the key overview of the movements that we explore and what we're looking to on the map. So final sort of overview of the core concepts, you've got the Aikido concept, which is basically the way to harmonize energy. That's translation of Aikido, what it means. Those three concepts that we just looked at, which is that movement from the me to you to the us. Again, simplified in that sort of dance movement that we're going in, continually moving from one to another. I might stay a little bit in the one, in the two, and then in the three, back to the two, back to the one, etc. And the last sort of thing I'd like to share is this little quote from Osensi. We didn't talk a lot about him last week, but I guess this is as good a time as any. So one of my favorite expressions from him, and one of his most well known, is true victory is victory over oneself. Again, that's what it's about. It's not about dominating another. It's about managing and being a sort of master of oneself and becoming victorious over that. So they're sort of the three core concepts. And I want to do a fine little deep dive, and this is going to be quick, and before we actually get into the practice, on the standard dojo activity. This will sort of help you situate what we're doing today. So every dojo, so a dojo, we do this online every Wednesday and sometimes on Fridays, but also we do workshops. But basically, every time we start practicing Aikido, verbal Aikido, very, very similar to the actual martial Aikido, we start with the salutation and the centering, which is really key in developing our centering reflexes so that we can we get better and better at managing when there is tension, that we can be welcoming to it. We can go, oh, great, an opportunity to practice, which may sound ambitious at first, but again, that's where we're going, as we're always working on that as a practitioner. So that sort of welcoming moments, welcoming reflex, if you like, to be able to manage whatever tension comes our way. We start and we end with that. So we get at least 2 opportunities to practice centering. Just again, a reminder, centering is that there's no one way to do it. We welcome also other people sort of sharing their own way to get centered. So again, that's the first step in the dojo. Then we move on to verbal stretching, which again, is going to be the core focus of our session today. And what it's about is warming up 2 aspects, 2 muscles, if you like, the centered expression muscle. So being able to just focus on, where you're at, your truth, your needs, your preferences, your desires, your feelings, etc. Being able to do that in a centered way, and being able to listen in a centered way, kind of neutrally. We call that enhanced listening. We're going to look at that a little bit later too, of course. So the third thing that we always do in dojos is, of course, the reason for being there is to spar, is to practice the moves. So the moves, and we're going to I gave a few little moves last week. This week, we're going to look at quite a few moves. But what's important about these moves, or if you call them techniques, if you like, is that they are kind of unsatisfactory in any exchange if there isn't that posture that, again, I keep coming back to, and for a good reason. Again, I explained it last week. If I give you a move and I say the move is, well, what do you mean? And I go, well, what do you mean? Right. So that second one would give much more rise for an escalation, which again is what we're trying to avoid. So again, your posture, and we always talk about sort of sincerity in posture. So if you ask a question, then you're sincerely interested in knowing what a person means, without having sort of an idea that I'm going to counter this as soon as they say what they're going to say. So it really is that openness, and as we said, they're giving that person a space to express themselves. So they're the standard dojo activities. which leads us on to our core activity today, which is this verbal stretching. Again, what it's about is warming up, observing our posture. We're basically going to look at the sort of the two different postures. So that's the posture 1 and posture 2, which we've covered. So basically, the stretch, among other things, is to stay in posture 1 as long as possible, or to stay in posture 2. So again, just to remind, especially people who've just joined us or may have missed something last week, the posture 1 is me, the posture 2 is you. So I'm staying basically in as long as I can, just if I'm speaking. So I'm going to be staying in posture 1, just speaking about me, not speaking about someone else, not even interested about what the other person has to share at that moment, but really just focusing on me and my view of the world, my truth, if you like. And for this exercise, the verbal stretching exercise, it needs another person. So it is usually done, not always, but usually done in sort of pair work. So one person will practice their centered expression skills. The other person will practice their centered listening skills. Again, centered on the other person. So this listener, this facilitator, basically, will lead the activity with a stretch card, which is on the next slide. We're going to look at that in more detail. And we're going to practice it so you know what you're doing before you sort of step into the verbal dojo, if you like, and start practicing yourselves. So the facilitator basically will just very simply read through the stretch card, which is a series of questions. And the questions basically are there to enable the listener to just practice listening without starting to interpret, without judging, with just being able to sort of receive. We kind of say it's like a satellite dish. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to practice just neutrality in that posture 2. And again, this posture key in the practice on the mat, which is going to serve us later. So that's what you're doing as a listener or facilitator. If you're a speaker, or you're the person who the questions are being asked to, you get to choose the term that you're going to stretch. So Peter, if you're okay, we can do this as a sort of illustration in just a minute. Are you good for that?
I'm your favorite guinea pig, aren't I?
Yes, you are. Absolutely.
If I have to.
Well, I'm asking you because I know you've actually shown quite an interest in stretching in the past. We've done quite a few stretches.
Yes.
As far as I
yes.
remember. Yeah. I remember actually, just sort of back to the day, I remember, I mean, we get to choose many different words, and I can share, usually the facilitator sort of gives a choice of words, but I do remember you bringing up the word meaning. So we were asking, what is the meaning of meaning? Did you remember this? Does this ring a bell with you?
I have not, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised I did that.
But it was good. It was really good. Really fun as well. So again, you're the speaker in this, so I'll be the facilitator just to sort of give an idea for people about how this rolls out. You're the speaker. You can't go wrong. You're basically speaking your truth, but what you're aiming at doing is just practicing your centered expression, speaking sagely your truth. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to throw up on the screen an example of a stretch card. So this is kind of number 1 stretch card. There's a huge variety of stretches. They actually do help us in many other ways of usefulness on the mat. We're going to talk about that later. But for the time being, all you need to focus on as beginners in this is to say, okay, right, I'm going to just practice my listening skills in this person to try and be as neutral as possible. And so that's what I'm going to do. And what I'm going to ask Peter to do is, again, just express his reality. I'm going to go through the first 3 questions on this, really simply. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give all the questions in the chat to the people who are okay about practicing. And then they can go into the rooms to be able to to start practicing themselves and continue on to question 4 and 5 after that. So without further ado, let's give this a go. Peter, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so let's take three words. Let's take the word listening, the word accompanying, and the word practice. Which of those three words would you like to stretch?
Let's do listening.
Okay, so I'm going to invite you to connect with the word listening. And when you're ready, just express what it means for you, and I'll be listening.
So the word listening is about receiving something. It could be many things, partly sounds, information, and there's a certain processing that occurs when you listen, a sense of perhaps understanding, or maybe a sense of not understanding what was being said. Um, and there's also a disposition that comes along with listening. There's a sense of care, and the care could be sort of localized to wanting to get something, or it could be globalized to sort of like caring about the person and having compassion for them. Yeah, so that's what initially comes to mind.
Okay, is there anything else about listening, or are you happy with that?
I'm happy with that.
Okay, and if you can sort of summarize into sort of what the key idea, if you can bring it down to like 1, 2, or 3 words, what would that be?
Is receiving something with a degree of care.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Peter. Awesome. All right, was that a stretch for you in any way?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this is what we're aiming at doing. Again, it can be a stretch. Sometimes it can be a stretch to explore things further. Sometimes it can be a stretch to get things down into sort of one key idea. But essentially, that's what you're doing. So you were just focusing on your truth and letting it explore what it was today. It could be different tomorrow. That's fine. What I'm doing, I'm focusing on that satellite dish aspect, recognizing when I go off it. I recognized when I went off because there was one moment where I was thinking to myself, I wasn't just there with you. I was going, whew, right. Some people might have, be able to just answer with just one word initially. And what will they think? Will they wonder if that's okay? So I went off into my own little mind for a microsecond and then remembered, okay, no, back to the you posture. Now, so what we'll just for people's, so that they know what they're doing here, basically, you succeed when you notice that you've left posture. That's the champagne moment. That's the moment where you're going to go, right, yes, I'm actually in recognition of self, because we're not like computers or machines. So obviously, if somebody says one word, that's going to trigger something off of me. But what I'm focusing on is going, how can I get back to that? How can I get back to that as quickly as possible? Just to be focused on whether, if and I don't know if Peter, when you were speaking, you might have thought maybe, oh, does he understand me, or am I going to, again, that really shouldn't be your concern, because you're thinking about the other person or something else other than where you're at. So it does sound selfish, but this is your moment to be selfish, right? You're actually you're focusing on the me, which is the self. So that's all good. Okay, Peter, any shares on that? Again, your content, as fascinating as it was, we don't necessarily talk about it. It belongs to you, and it's yours basically. And definitely, we're not here to analyze, or don't be coaches on the person. That's not what it's about. Again, so if you are practicing, remember, it's about your own self-observation, etc. Peter, please share.
Yeah, and then I think what I noticed there is I didn't even remember what I said after I said it, because I was just trying to like anchor myself in that kind of that spirit of the the truth in this position. And then there was moments where I felt like I was leaving, like I guess not being sovereign, where like, oh, is this making sense? Is this coherent? But just kind of like returning to that and just staying in that pocket. Yeah, so I felt the kind of the almost the ontology of it.
Yes, great. Well, again, that, like I said, it's not an academic exercise in that sense that you're not going to be right or wrong about it. There's none of that. It's about self-observation, recognizing that shifts or little slight movements from the posture that you're aiming to hold, and then just bringing it back to it as soon as you can. Right, I've seen there's lots of comments coming up, but I'm not quite sure what they are. Peter, is there any questions there that would help sort of people know what they're getting into?
People just saying that they like the method, they're respecting your work, yeah, gushing about you essentially. So yeah, there's good stuff.
All right. Okay, cool. So again, in just a moment, people are going to be sort of going into sort of rooms to be able to, in sort of private rooms with just two people working in it. Ideally, that is sort of the best way to do this. So just before you do, I just want to sort of run through the rest of the questions on this. I did questions 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to, excuse me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the questions from that, and let me stop the share on that so I can do it. I'm going to, I'm going to grab the questions on that, put them in the chat so that you guys have a, you know what you're doing. And let me do that. And just look through the last questions 4 and 5, because there is in fact 9 questions on this in this stretch. So it's basically 3, 3, and 3. So you've got those first 3 questions, and as you can see in the basic linear stretch, it asks you to do the breath stretch. So it's called breath, and because what you're doing is you're helping the other person breathe out. So Peter, as you saw, expressed what for him listening was. Breathe out, and he got to that point and he was like, okay. And I said, is there anything more? Is there anything else? Would you like to go further with that? And he said, no, and that was fine. So he'd read that, he'd sort of filled that like that, and then he went back to the center, right back down to what's the essence of that. So what word stands out from what you've expressed? So again, you know, you can, if you like, change the form of the question. It's good to sort of take the idea from the fresh card in the essence, but your intention should be to bring it down to that one key idea. You know, ideally 3 keywords or less. That's what you're aiming for, which is what you do. So you'll do the same thing with this question 4. So they'll ask you, what is the source? What is that? The source of that? Remember, whatever their interpretation of your question, that's good. Whatever it may be. If they think the source means etymology, go with it. Let them. You don't have to rewrite the question. Just if they say, what's the source of it? You know, where does it come from? Go with it. That's all good. So as facilitator, you're being as neutral as you possibly can. And then again, breathe it out. Anything else? Bring it down, and then back to the original word, which would have been listening here, or what might be a result of listening, or what might listening lead to. Breathe it out, breathe it back in again, and that's it. And so that should take about, you know, I would say maximum it's going to be like 15 minutes. So I'm going to try and give you guys 15 minutes to stretch both directions. So that basically means give yourselves about 6 minutes per stretch, which gives you the rest of the time to yet doing, as I see a question, we're doing all 5 questions in these breakouts. Yes. Sorry. So yeah, all 5 questions in both directions. So one person is going to be facilitator first. I would recommend that you choose, especially when we start off with verbal stretching, we tend to choose words that have positive connotations. There's a reason behind that. We can talk about it later, but it is good to sort of to explore words that have, like I said, I would say words with positive connotations. We generally tend to use words that have some relation to the practice, like we did just there with Peter. So I said words like listening, accompanying, and practice. There were 3 words. If you don't feel inspired for words, take those 3. I'm going to write them down into the yes, the facilitator. Yeah, just that's a question. The facilitator, generally speaking, the tradition in dojo is that the facilitator will propose 3 words and the participant will choose the one that they like most. They can always go, I don't like any of those words. And then the facilitator gets to propose another 3 words. But the idea is that the facilitator choose the words, and the idea is that the objective of the person is to listen first. So no matter what words I want you to talk about, I'm going to listen first. So the 3 words that I gave today were listen, practice, and accompany. Kind of appropriate for today, but like I said, if you want to know a few inspirational words around the practice, we often talk about centering, empathy, and harmony. Three ideas about practice as well that you can use them too. The word, we also have word of the day. The word of today is the word ready. Feel free to throw that in as well. Okay, so this is an important question I'm going to ask you guys, because it's the last stand, in the sense that before you get into practice, is there anything that I can give to you that would help you feel more comfortable, so that you are, again, comfortable in doing the next activity?
Yeah, if I could jump in and just so kind of to reflect. So first one, we choose one of the 3 words, then we just kind of free associate it from that position of me. And then you ask if the facilitator asks if there's anything else to expand it. If not, then kind of like go make that movement and have like a concise statement. And what's 4 and 5? Question 4 and 5. What are those?
So yeah, the question 4 or 5, this is again what we call a basic linear stretch. So we're going on sort of on a line here. So we take the original concept and then we'll say, okay, well, where does this come from? So if I continue with you, Peter, I might have said, so what would be at the source of listening? Or where does listening come from? Something like that. So I'll take it. We also do this, I mean, online, we do it like this very often when we're doing physical, like in the same room as people. Then we can actually do this standing up. It's really nice to do it standing up. So you're going to be you stand with the person in the middle of the room, and then you'll sort of say, when you're ready, take a step back. So you say, so you get, what is listening, you explore it, and then you go, okay, so when you're ready to answer question 4, take a step back and say, so what would be what comes before listening, for example, and then take a step back. And then you might go, all right, so let's go back to listening now. And what comes after listening? Or what will be the result of listening? And you take a step forward. So that's why we call it the linear stretch, because there is that sort of linear movement to it. Does that answer your question, Peter?
Yep.
Okay.
And what about number 5, the result of?
So that's the movement forward.
Let's move forward. Yeah.
That's moving forward. So yeah, the movement the 4 is back. So you'll go back and then you do the breath stretch, bring it back down to the essence, then go forward to the original word, and then step another one forward to that 5 to get it to the result.
Cool.
That's it. Good question to clarify. Anything else?
If anyone has any questions, feel free to just jump off mute. If not, then
I think, Peter, you're going to have to divvy up the rooms. Depending on how many people there are, totally recommend that you cut it in half and make that amount of rooms.
So 2 people
per room. Yeah, it'll be 2 people per room.
Sorry, can I jump in with the question, Peter?
Oh yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yes.
So I feel like I'm clear on the exercise, and then I just noticed a thought which was like, how is this accompanying the attack? So could you just say something about how this practice
right.
that sort of
like I said, this is not accompanying the attack. This is not practicing verbal aikido. What this is warming up posture for the posture that you'll need. Now that said, Luke, it is we're going to come back to that very point directly after this exercise, because you're going to start to see the links up of why we ask certain questions, what it's all about. But yes, remember, this is not verbal aikido practice. This is it's like when, put it this way, if you go for a run, you might stretch before you go for a run, and you're going to stretch. Maybe you might grab your heel and pull it right up to your buttocks. Now, when you're actually running, your leg's never going to go into that position, but you're going to stretch it out, pull it back further, so that when you're actually running, that it'll be nice and ready, nice and warmed up for the effort that you're about to make. Does that answer your question?
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Good question. Excellent.
All right. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to jump in. But Luke, 15 minutes you said for this one?
Yeah, give 15 minutes. And if people finish beforehand, great, they can come back. But just again, there's no pressure to answer in a certain style of the question. Again, give yourself the freedom to explore. There's no right or wrong answer to this. Again, it is just about you practicing that posture. And if you're giving yourselves feedback at the end, remember, give yourself feedback on your own posture, not on the other person that belongs to them.
Mm-hmm.
Always back to yourself.
Very cool. And so if anyone has to slip out now, it's probably the best to do so. And Luke, do you want to be in a room, or should I keep you out?
Well, basically, well, Peter, keep you and me out, so that if there's an even number, then we'll stretch here. If there's an odd number, then you can maybe go in and actually get a bit of stretching practice done yourself.
Okay, cool. So I will jump in and just ignore your invite.
Okay.
So I'll open up the rooms now.
Okay, welcome back, people. All right, we'll start kind of falling back in. Okay, David, Lars, Caroline, you guys I can see. Any shares on what you just did? Was there anything difficult in it, or anything that stood out as a question you'd like to bring to the group?
Caroline said an interesting thing, that the pace when you listen seems to slow down, or you have to slow down in order to listen and not think at the same time about the same question.
Well, that's a very good observation, Caroline. And what you're noticing, again, is what you're starting to notice is that sort of movement from, you know, I'm listening. Am I listening to the other person, or do I need to have an answer for myself? And you're sort of you're leaving that you posture to come back to yourself, which is absolutely normal, which is absolutely, again, standard. We're not machines. We can't just do this all the time. But what you're recognizing is that shift. And then all you do, and all we try to do when we're doing this is, oh, I've noticed that I'm answering myself. I'll do it later. And just come back to that presence with that other person and giving them that space. Really good. Really, really interesting. Great observation. Anything else on that? Okay, we got a good group back. Peter, do you want to grab the mic?
Would you like for me to share my thoughts, or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you've done this before, so whoever you're working with, again, what did you guys notice on the in the actual activity? What your posture moving from yourself to the other, or from the other to yourself, etc.
Mm-hmm. I was doing the listening. I don't know if Margaret, do you want to take you in, share your reflections as a speaker?
Sure. One thing I noticed about my own positioning or posture was I did notice that sense of feeling pulled to like move outwards and look away from my own sense of what I was saying and like try to accommodate the other person. So I felt that as a bit of a tugging, that it was just kind of like, okay, no, we're gonna stay here, recenter. And I also, one thing that came up in the discussion with Peter afterwards was I noticed a real sense of freedom when I did that, of that it felt very deliciously selfish to not have to worry about who I was talking to or like trying to make myself understood. I could just literally say what I wanted, and I didn't have to at all think about accommodating another or like using specific language or anything. It was just, it felt very freeing to stay with myself in that way.
Great share, Margaret. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And this is actually one of the very common shares. Some people, and this happened a few times, I remember last year, people were saying to me, look, you know, the only 10 minutes in my week where somebody actually listens to me is when I come to the Verbal Aikido dojo and someone is there to actually just take whatever's being said. And you're right, Margaret, the objective of the other person, that you know that they're practicing just listening, just being there present. So you can pretty much guarantee that they're, even if they do kind of recognize judgments or whatever within themselves, that they're recognizing them and then coming back to you. And a very good point as well, Margaret, because yeah, you're not trying to necessarily be understood. And indeed, as if you were like Peter was in being in that facilitator mode, if you don't understand what the other person's saying, you got to be able to let it go and just come back to, I'm just receiving. I'm a satellite. Satellite dishes don't necessarily understand what they're receiving. They're just directed towards that person, and they're open to receiving whatever's coming at them. That's what you're aiming at doing. As I said, and with Luke's question that really sort of helped illustrate it, is you're pushing that muscle further than you need to, but again, to be able to make it easier for when we're actually using that on the mat. But really good stuff, guys.
And if I can add to that, like one of the things that we talk about here often at the Stoa, Luke, is like a 3-part epistemics, which maps over quite nicely to what you presented with the positions. Like the first part is like subjective or intersubjective, is what the me, and the second epistemics is intersubjective, like the relationship, and then the third is objective, like truth. And I noticed when that insecurity came online, like say with our thing about listening, is that there's like a judgment. Am I doing good or am I doing bad? Right? It was like just like this independent, like objective of judgment. And then when I started like just not knowing that, then it felt like just the tinge of insecurity came online, and it felt kind of detached from the other two, like especially from me, like just speaking what's most alive. So I thought that was interesting, kind of in relationship to these 3 ways of knowing.
This is it. Yeah, what you're, again, the kind of things that you'll observe in from that speaking position is that it's the idea of doubt. Like you said, am I right? And then you're coming back to your center and going, this is my truth. Or it might be, again, concern for what the other person is getting or not. Again, that's going to the other. Again, just back to self. Or even, you know, I hope the other, looking for a reaction from the other person, looking for approval from the other person. These sort of things, you're stepping outside that me space, which again, it's just part of the exercise. And the things that you'll notice as a listener that will sort of give you an indication that, oh, I've stepped outside the you space, is anticipation. I know what the other person's going to say. Things like, so you have this idea of finishing their sentences, and you start to see the connections between what you notice in the stretch and how that pertains to where your difficulties might be in conflict. Because if you're starting to anticipate what another person says, if you're starting to cut them off, or you think you know what they're going to say, that's going to cause an escalation. And other things you might notice are like even just drifting. You know, you drift off again in conflict. That happens too. What other things might you notice? Yeah, kind of. Oh, I wouldn't have said that. Things like that, bring it back to you, and you're not in the sort of receiving place to the other person. So all these sort of things. So I do want to get a little bit of, maybe even just a little bit of a look at some of the practice and how this pertains and how this is actually useful when we step onto the mat, and then of course off the mat. But has anybody got any other shares, especially difficulties? If anyone found anything difficult about that exercise, please do bring it to our attention before we move on.
Yeah, I found it. I found it extremely difficult somehow to focus on myself. I think I felt, when I was like really feeling it, the most natural thing was to just shut up and think it in my head instead of saying anything. Like, even, I think part of it is like just like connecting over Zoom. Like, I'm conscious of whether the other person can hear me fine. Like, that's also like a concern. And like one time the audio went off with my partner, and I was like, oh, okay, I need to check whether they're still here. And so that made it really difficult. But I don't think the point of the exercise would be to just stay completely quiet. Like, that feels like the most natural place for me to just, you know, like express my truth. Like, no words need to form for me. But that would probably miss the point of the stretch, is my guess.
Not necessarily, Sahil. In fact, there's something in what you're saying. I mean, we start with a certain, what we call a dynamic, and the dynamic is introspective. That's the default way we stretch. That said, once you get sort of further into practice, we work on what we call concise. So in other words, you just come out with the essence, one key word. So what is listening? Care for the other, for example. You might sort of come down that. But all that inner dialogue, yeah, you practice on doing it and getting more and more efficient with the inner dialogue until you come to that core essence of what it is. So which of course requires a little bit more patience for the person who's listening. But yes, it's it doesn't matter what happens within the confines of the stretch. What's interesting is to recognize about whatever happens, that sort of doubt, am I doing this right, as Peter talked about it earlier, is to just come back, use that as an opportunity to observe centeredness within the practice. Does that answer you? Does that sort of give you a bit of a compliment on that, Sahib?
Yeah, and like I was noticing, and I also named the noticing while my conversation was really useful.
Excellent. Yeah, very useful. Absolutely, put a name on it for real. Okay. Any other specific difficulties or questions on that thing that we just did, or can we move on? All right. Okay. I'm gonna bring up my screen again. So let me from this current slide. All right. So we're going to start to see, I guess, how this relates to what we do on the mat, and let's see how far we get with it, basically. All right. So basically, I'm going to give you a kata. Now, kata is basically, it means form in Japanese, which it's basically a sequence. So it's this one is a very simple one. It's just 2 movements, and again, what you're avoiding a lot of the time in practice is avoiding ping-ponging. So if you sort of ask a question and then you respond back and then it goes like that. Here, nice little way to practice continual 2 movements. So you're basically going to go you, 2 you movements that are really nice. We will do a kata. Now, important to note about katas is that katas are mostly for pedagogical purposes. So basically to start training to things, to start developing reflexes, but they're not necessarily what you're going to use in real life. Just like you do a sequence of movements in any form of martial arts, you got to be able to adapt. You can use things and it's good. There's some moves that might flow nicely into each other. But do keep your eyes open always in any sort of form of kata that if another movement seems much more appropriate, go with that. Anyway, so that's just a sort of overview on what katas are about. But the idea on this particular kata is that it is useful when you're faced with what we call a series of accusations or criticisms. So you can imagine that moment where somebody's going, oh, you're just not there when I need you, and you're just so selfish, and you don't respect my time at all, you're always there, and all these sort of, you get that sort of
hey Luke,
yes.
your screen share is doing all these funky things right now. I just want to
okay, hold on, let me try again. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I think this is the right one. Is that right?
Yes, that's the right one.
Okay, thank you. Awesome. So what we're looking at is like I said, that sort of rollout of, accusation, criticism, boom, boom, boom. They're all flowing at you, and it might seem kind of counterintuitive, but the movement that we'll do in that kata is the first one is going to be, is there anything else? So there's a name for all the moves we have. There's kind of a name for them all, but this, you can see how this seems counterintuitive. So somebody's throwing lots of attacks, a lot of criticisms at you, and instead of, and Aikido is that sort of art of non-resistance. So you're not going to resist. If you push back on anyone, when it's going to escalate, and you start to justify, remember we did that last session, we talked about justifying jade. So just to avoid justifying, arguing, defending, explaining. You start to explain why, that can give them more fuel for their fire. So this, like I said, counterintuitive move, it's actually called kino nagare, letting the energy flow. Because I let it flow is if that helps you remember it. But it's a meiotic move, so you're sort of drawing out. So it does take courage to go towards, always. Go towards and then draw out. So you can imagine that. And if you say, people throwing all these attacks at you, and you go, well, is there anything else? Now, of course, this is where it comes back to that idea of posture. Posture is so important. If I go, well, is there anything else you want to talk about? Of course, that's going to create some certain reaction. But if you have that sincerity to go, okay, this person's expressing, and you say, is there anything else? Draw it out. There's loads of different ways to explore this move. You can say words like, I'm listening. You can say, continue, do go on, things like that. Again, be really careful to not be provocative about this. That is your posture. It needs sincerity of understanding. So that would be the first move in this kata. And the second move would be, well, what's the most important part for you? Or what's your priority? Or what would you like to look at first? Okay, so and that move's called the funnel. Does this start to sound familiar? Doesn't anybody notice anything about this sequence of moves that we're looking at now and the stretch that you just did? Lars, I see. Did you nod your head, Lars? I think somebody nodded their head. Okay, well, if you haven't noticed it, I hope I'll point it out to you here. This really is what you just did when you did that breath stretch. You recognize that you did, is there anything else? You were breathing out, and then it was breathing back in again and going, what's the most important, or what stands out? So you can start to see that the moves we do in the stretch are there's the significance behind them. It's a way to practice certain moves that you're going to use on the mat. So that again, what you're doing in this with sincerity is actually giving that person the space to be understood in what is most important, instead of pushing back. And you might already, with that sort of a chain or a series of accusations, that you might recognize that this person is starting to feel understood. That, okay, is there anything else you've noticed? And then, okay, what's the most important thing? That just in itself may start, you may start to feel the energy of the exchange start to diminish and start going towards a conversational energy. Okay. All right. So there's a few questions here. I don't know if I can answer them. We've got this archetypal hero type. I don't know what that means. Is there questions that I can answer, Peter? You're going to be the person to
I think it's best not to read the chat right now. But no questions coming up.
Okay, all right. Well, so let's move on. And again, like I said, I would like you guys to get a little bit of practice done. But that's just one kata, which is a really nice kata that, like I said, I'd recommend. Give it a go, use the right posture in it. And I'm going to give you a second kata. And again, you're going to start to see why we look at this. So here's another one, really nice. It's called timeline kata, also called the shortcut kata. It's pretty quick. And it really has quite can have a very direct effect when used with blame, accusation, that sort of thing. So, and let's just imagine that maybe we've used that first primary kata and we've said, okay, well, what's the most important? And the person says, okay, well, the most important thing is I don't feel respected. Right. What do you mean by that? And again, your posture here is going to have the largest impact on that energy shift that you may start to notice. So what do you mean by that? What do you mean by respect? You can focus in on specific words. Again, you guys starting to notice this was the very first question you asked your partner in the stretch. What does that mean for you? It's called a meaning prod. It's a little movement to get in behind what a person means in a specific thing. The second move after that, so what is respect? Well, respect, obviously, respect is when if you don't do what I say, or you'll get the person sort of exploring what that respect means. They may still, and I'm using that sort of intonation to illustrate that they may still have sort of a lot of negative energy with them, but the more you stay with them, and help give them that opportunity to express and get to the meaning of their communication, then they will feel understood. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. So it's what you're aiming at in any case. This move, again, the second move of this kata, where is this coming from? Which is called a past prod or a past intention prod. So you're going to try to get back to where this is coming from. What is at the source of this? And then you've probably guessed the next question, right? Where are we going now with this? Now, so these three moves, what do you mean by, for example, respect? And where is this coming from? This is coming from the last time you did everything. Okay, right. So what do we do about this now? Well, and you might already start to sense that if this was you in an exchange, or if this was somebody else in an exchange, that there would be a shift, that the energy is already starting to shift into something much more constructive, much more conversational. Now, I've underlined the word we in this because that's kind of going to lead us into our next session, which is looking at focusing on the point number 3, or posture number 3, which is the us. So you really start to see that that is going in a future direction when we're starting to introduce the idea of us, which again, like I said, we're going to focus a little bit more next week. So that is, there are 2 different katas that we've started to look at, which help you kind of see an overview of different techniques that when used with that posture. And if you're wondering about, again, well, what does he mean by this posture? Remember how you asked the question in the stretch. When you were in that stretch and you said to that person in front of you, with all the care or the lovingness or that even just that neutrality that you were aiming at in that moment, that you were saying, okay, so, well, what do you mean by listening? All right. And that same posture as you said, well, is there anything else? And that same posture as you said, well, what's the most important thing? And that same posture, you said, well, where does that come from? And the same posture as you said, well, where does that go to? That same way that you're doing it, you're practicing that posture in the stretch for a reason. That reason is what you're going to be able to use on the mat. Okay, that is kind of the end of the content that I wanted to share with you guys today. We've still got a little bit of time, and I don't know what you guys want to do. You've got a few choices here. I want to give you 3 choices. Number 1, I can get you guys to go on the mat, do a little bit of practice, and actually I'll give you what we call a sack attack. So a sack attack is a bag of varied attacks that you can just play around with, and you can start calling each other names and sort of saying, you're so selfish, or you're so lazy, or whatever it is. So any common standard attacks, you can practice with that. Other choice is we can just do a sort of a roundup and an overview and start looking at what your takeaways are and do maybe a Q&A on that. Or if you guys just want to fire attacks at me and watch me do some moves and sort of, again, sort of look at them afterwards, we can do that too. So a few different ideas. I'm going to stop the share so I can sort of really focusing on you guys and what it is you want to do. So over to either Peter, if you want to lead the sort of drawing out, this is your group. Do you want to help them sort of decide which direction we're going in?
I got excited when you gave option number 3.
Okay.
So looks like some people in the room like it. And so how would that one look? We just insult you, or?
Okay, absolutely, yeah. That's pretty much how it looks. But now there's this very, very slight difference between when we do this live, in other words, with people actually in the same room, because I can see where the attack, you can actually see that you're being attacked, etc. I can see it soon talking, so that has an importance to it. So very simply, if you want to attack me, or again, you make sure that you're sort of signaling it. Very simple. Okay, I want to attack, and off you go, and come out with the hardest attacks you can. Obviously, there's an opportunity to do that. If you want to give a context around the attack, saying, okay, situation is you're a baker and the other person's coming in and they're a client or whatever, please feel free to give a little bit of illustration around the attack so we can make it as realistic as you like. Doesn't really matter the context, but what is important is that you get sort of a chance to see the practice in work. So
Cool. So how about this? I can go first, and then whoever would like to go next, just indicate in the chat or put up your hand, and then I'll call on you, and then you can cue it up. And the idea is that they give a context, or they don't have to give one, and they can just, any other parameters, like they just can insult you in any way. Yeah. And then you're going to use those things that you just told us.
I see a lot of people smiling at this. That's good. All right.
Okay. Let's go. Okay. So Luke, I'm I lost the plot with this whole session. It didn't really make sense and it wasn't coherent.
Well, what do you mean by coherent?
The way you expressed your ideas was vague. I just see the room people not understanding. Like I'm frankly disappointed.
Okay, well, what would you have preferred?
Well, I would like you to come in with this with some preparation. You know, this frankly sucked.
So preparation, is there anything else?
Well,
I'll
like,
tell you what, how about the two of us sit down a little bit later, you can see it, you can zero out.
I totally derped. I was like,
yes, you did, right. What happened there, Peter? What happened?
Well, you put me in a different space where I was like kind of the frame was I had to fish for more reasons. And so like I didn't have, you kind of cut out the energy. And then it was a different headspace where I was searching for kind of like content rather than kind of like running with that kind of attack energy.
There's no there basically. In other words, when you were pushing, I was again using just moves accompanied, and a couple of them we saw today in practice already. So I used is there anything else, and that kind of that threw you a little bit, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It did.
Really simple. Again, that's just that simple movement of drawing out instead of going, well, it's not this. And if I pushed back, there you got your escalation. As soon if I start pushing back, but that moment, and what I did, and that's where I call the timeout, because we're going to look at that next week, is that that moment where you were destabilized, and you could feel that sort of floating moment, and I think everybody could see it, where it was like, well, he doesn't know where to go from here. That's where I'm not going to push you down there. I'm going to extend my arm out to say, hey, don't fall.
Right.
Hey, how about we? Now you can push back on that arm, and people do all the time, and that's what we call an Aiki block. So I'm going to propose an Aiki. Hey, how about we? And again, that's what we're going to be focusing on a little bit more next week. But yeah, it's once you notice that other person is kind of falling, don't let them fall. Bring them back up again.
Yeah, I love that. It's like saving face, allowing them to save face. Like I was coming at you with like total chat energy, and then you like destabilized me, and then you brought me back. So that's good. So anyone who would like to go, maybe just put up their hand so I can see it in the room, and I'll pick you.
And please remember, I will not take anything personally. It's again,
Luke's a champ at this. So
really go ahead. It's made for that. And yeah, please.
I had a question that could possibly take the form of a mild attack.
Ooh.
If you're up for that.
Okay, well, I prefer sort of harder, but yes, go ahead.
we can ask questions at the end, maybe sneak in like 5 minutes, and then like, so how about we bookmark the questions, Sahil, and then we continue with the attacks, because
or if you want, Sahil, if you think that this is a question that you would take as an attack, well then I can sort of say, all right, I can move with it in a verbal Aikido way. Otherwise, I'm just going to see it as conversation and sort of move on with that. You see what I mean? But if it's something that, again, what we consider to be an attack, and we talked about this last week, is if it's an attack for you, it's an attack. It doesn't matter. Like I said, if you perceive, if I say, well, it's a really nice apartment, and you see that as an attack, well then, that's fine. That's what you got to be able to work with.
Yeah, it can totally be an attack. Do you want me to?
Okay, well then go.
Cool. So what I just noticed, and what I noticed like several months ago when you demonstrated this with Peter again some time ago, was something like, so what I'm seeing is sort of like an on-mat versus real world difference. So what you're doing is this is in some ways what Peter had to do was improv. He had to come up with the context and the reasons. And what all you did was like push the improv pressure onto Peter, which is it's really hard to come up with a story. It's much more easy. It's much easier to do that when I have like a strong truth and it's just like I'm just raining on you. Like I can just do like a full rampage. But it's much easier for you to like turn into a question and shift it into just like theatrics instead of like actual combat. And so this kind of thing won't translate into the real world when someone really has an axe to grind.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in what you're saying, Sahil, that it is bringing the other person back to kind of find reasons why this might, this might be valid or not. And yeah, can I share with you just where I think the crossover is?
Sure.
Okay, so it really is that the same is true in whether he's looking for his words in an improvisation or whether he's looking for his words in a real situation of conflict. What you're doing in both situations is exploring those moves, and however soon it comes, it eventually comes, that moment. And what we're aiming at doing is just sort of accompanying that moment. So no matter how,
Again, it sort of seems like
yeah.
basically you win here because you're completely indifferent. You have no stakes in the outcome of the conversation, so it's pretty easy to win. You're just being like, oh, okay, let me listen to you. Okay, let me move with you. But if there's like any stake in the conversation, if suppose we say you're so bad, I want you to leave right now, you're wasting everyone's time, and then you actually have to do it, suddenly it's much harder for you. Then you actually have to like parry and block possibly.
I think I see where you're coming from, but do you want to try that with me now?
Yeah, if it's hard to do that because I don't have something that can make you is like valid enough to make you leave. But what I'm saying is sort of negating how much this practice can translate into the real world.
I can perhaps jump in here because I have a lot of.
I thought you wanted me to actually manage that.
Oh, okay.
But you'll see what Peter's doing, and I'm pointing to Peter, he's there. But you see what Peter's doing, and that's a natural reflex as well, and it's kind of the savior. So if you see someone in difficulty, you're going to jump in. What we'll encourage, though, sorry to block you on that, Peter, but it is that we will absolutely recommend this sort of one-to-one exchanges. So. But I do appreciate you sort of jumping in on me that. Yeah, there's again, Sahil, really interesting to hear that perspective. And I guess the only way to sort of find out is to actually to give it a try. Is there not? Are you sure there's nothing that you can attack me about? Really, am I that?
I think you have a very weak counter argument. You're sort of saying like, yeah, let's just see. Whereas like I have sort of negated like part of what you're saying, like part of the impact of the activity. And I'm trying to do it in like a polite, civil way, but like it might really like shred through. That's a possibility.
So how can we know if this actually works in real life?
Yeah, so I would try to apply it and see that, wow, I don't have this question, me asking the question doesn't change the power dynamics that make up the context of the rest of the situation, which means that the conversation or like the power of my words can be taken away from the fact that someone else has power over me, and it can like feed into the real world, and that will cause me to utterly fail. Like I might try all of this, someone might find it cute, and then it's over. I still have to like be a doormat in like actual activity, which is like non-verbal.
Okay, well, again, so how could we know if this actually works in real life? Look, how about the two of us, right? How about you come to the dojo?
Can you try like not asking me questions and then just responding to what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely.
I think what you're doing is like shifting pressure on me, but that's not really helpful.
What would you like me to
clarify? Yeah, I would prefer you to like clarify the point of what I'm saying of respecting like the power structures outside the conversation.
So if I've understood correctly, you're interested in knowing if this works in real life, or is it something else?
No, I think I was more commenting on like the narrowness of your style, like the narrowness of the way you do it, which makes it look impressive, makes it look successful, but all you're doing is you're winning in a simulation rather than something that can translate. I'm also like mindful of the time. I don't want to hog all of the time.
This is good. This is really interesting. So what would be more interesting is like a sort of a wider style, or is it something else?
You're doing the question thing again. Can you repeat the question anyway?
Is it you're looking for a sort of a more wider style, or is it something else?
No, I think I'm just like I'm pointing out what you did. That's pretty much all what I'm doing. I'm sort of trying to say that it might not be as impressive as you make it seem because of the particular narrowness of your style. And I think I'm repeating myself. Maybe I'm not being very clear.
Right. I'm trying to understand again, just getting to your message, what you would prefer to see, which would be if it's narrow and that's not convenient for you, you prefer a wider style? Sort of more.
I don't know if I have a preference.
All right.
Again,
Okay.
you're sort of,
Well, would you
sort of
like
in
me
the
to
same
share?
thing.
Would you like me to share what I see as an interesting part of the style, or will we move
I
on
think
to the
like
next
there's a
person?
part of me that wants you to like speak up for yourself and
Yes. Thank
defend
you.
your
Thank
right.
you. Okay. So I can share now with the rest of them what I think about the style and how it can help other people. Thank you. Okay, so just a little time out on that. What I've done there, Sahil, is I've given you all the space you need until you got to say, right, I have to shut up now and listen. So which is exactly what happened there. In other words, you've said, okay, okay, you need to talk. Okay, but I will only talk when when that space has been created to that you are actually going to be able to receive. So because if I haven't done that, if I haven't given you, if I've pushed back on all the stuff that you've said, then it turns into who's right and who's wrong sort of exchange. Again, a winner, loser, which is a game that just not interested in playing. Again, one of the interesting parts about what we're doing is that we're not trying to convince. If I'm trying to convince you that this works and you're not convinced, well, then I'm trying to dominate you in some way, trying to make you believe. But I'm not trying to make you believe. I know myself that this actually works. But your view of it, just like when the person was stretching, they're giving you their reality of this moment, and that belongs to them, and that's good. That's fine. Does that answer? Does that help you, Sahil, a bit?
Well, I mean, I'm sort of out of that game now, but yeah, what you said was
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so what you note, I used a few moves there. I used a few moves which were from from last session, which was number one, coming back to me, sort of just where I'm at with that, and then creating. You remember that from last week? We did an aperture, so we had that movement towards sort of go. Would you like to hear my position on this? And you'll notice when I did that, even the first time I did that, you blocked me on that. You didn't I said, would you like to hear? And you said, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And you continued. That happens a lot. You'll do an aperture. You'll say, here, so would you like to hear where I'm at? And the other person says, yeah, but sure, I already know, or they just blast through it. So you'll know that's not the time to actually start giving your point of view because they're not ready to hear it. So we looked at that last week. I did actually use quite a lot of moves that we didn't talk about today. One of them is called I used quite a lot. And again, you kind of blocked on it a little bit, but I think that created destabilization. Whereas I said, what would you prefer? What would you prefer? When somebody gives you something negative, very interesting move to use to say, what would what would be preferable for you? What would you feel more comfortable with? Things like that. Because people will give a negative, but as long as they're not, well, and again, just no matter if you're confronted with any sort of what we would call, negativity or how can I say it, complaints and things like that. We get that a lot in France. I don't know what it's like in your side of the world, but we do get a lot. And so it's just a really nice move. You'll start to see that if you ask the person, what would you prefer? Or what's missing, then you can actually start to go in a constructive direction. Now, you didn't want to commit to that, Sahil, which happens as well. And again, you sort of come back to center and start exploring a different direction with that person. So what is the meaning of their communication? What would they like to get? What's the point of actually communicating? Well, with what they're doing, what do they hope to get out of it, etc. So again, you can explore different directions. There's no one set way about it. The more you practice, this kind of the more different moves you start to recognize, and the more you can sort of feel if you want to go in this direction or a different direction. But thank you for that, Sahil. That gave you sort of a nice little illustration. Anything else? Any others before we finish up today?
Yeah, maybe Margaret. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Okay, this is going to be meandering, so I apologize in advance. But I guess I'm wondering about fatigue and stamina, because when I see you doing that, it feels so familiar. Like I used to be a coach, an agile coach, and there is this sense of like, you're just like dancing around someone. And what came to mind for me was like a sheepdog, almost herding sheep, of how they never like, rarely do they like go into the herd, but they're always just kind of like making movements in response to the other movements. And the other analogy that came to my mind was I thinking of other martial arts and how when you're doing a martial art that's like not based on weight classes, and sometimes you're up against people who have much different energy sources or like ability to overpower you, and then there's different strategies you take around, do you like go in for the attack quickly because you know you'll fatigue more easily than them, like they can just like kind of outlast you even if you maybe are more skillful in other ways, if they have the stamina to just like stamina to run you into the ground, right? Like it comes up in boxing. And so I know for myself when I'm doing what I now would call maybe verbal Aikido, is that sometimes I just like, I hit a wall and I'm like, I can't, this, like what you were doing with Sahila, it's like, no, this is going on for like way too long. And I want off the merry-go-round, and like, I don't want to like devolve into just like attacking you and obliterating you, but like this needs to stop, and you are unable to stop your own energy. And I no longer want to deal with it. So I guess I'm curious about
our perspective on that. The perspective on that is, of course, it always depends on the context and the relationship. What the usefulness of verbal Aikido is when your priority is on the relationship. So if it is a relationship that you'd like to preserve, then yeah, these kind of movements tend to work. They tend to de-escalate things and again enable sort of future connection. That said, in just as a general rule, especially for beginners, what we would recommend is to say, okay, 3 aikis, 3 propositions of again a possible harmony with the other person. After the 3rd time, and they need to be sort of consecutive. It's not like I propose, hey, look, how about I give you a hand with this next time, and we see where we go from there. That's one possible Aikido movement. And the other person goes, I don't need your help, whatever. So, and then you go, and then if you slip into an aggressive exchange, well, then you kind of got to start again. But 3 consecutive Aikido proposals, 1, 2, 3. In general, just what we've noted, 9% of the time, that's going to shift something. It's again within yourself, possibly within the relationship, because again, people treat you the way you teach them to treat you. So if you're coming back, if they're trying to play again a game of domination, I win, you lose, or I win and I get a reaction out of you. There's many different sort of mindsets on that, but if they do that and they see that they're just not getting a hold, which is probably what Sahil felt there, that whatever you try to grasp onto, there's no hold. There's nothing, there's no there. There's nothing to, no matter what I throw at you, it doesn't stick, but I'm still staying with you, okay? If you're able to do that, again, 3 times, you're introducing to the person that I'm not playing this game of win-lose, dominate, be dominated. Do it once, do it twice, do it 3 times, then back off. Then, because you're illustrating your intent, you're illustrating your intention with 3, if we do this in live performances. So we'll say, so if I slap you on the back and you go, hey, stop hitting me. And I go, oh, sorry, my mistake. I do it a 2nd time, you go, hey, it's twice. If I do it a 3rd time, you're going to go, you are doing this on purpose. You're illustrating your intent by doing something 3 times consecutively, and so that's what you're really reinforcing in that with that sort of 3 times movement. So you'll practice, you propose an Aiki. That doesn't work, you propose a different Aiki. You propose, and we'll talk about the Aikis next week. But you'll propose a 3rd Aiki, which might even be humor or something like that. And you'll know if you haven't noticed an energy shift in that. Yes, say, look. And that could be the 3rd Aiki, just to go, listen, how about we talk about this again when the 2 of us have a bit more sort of, we're not suffering from fatigue or whatever. You started by talking about fatigue. I would say, yes, that is a key aspect of being able to get to center. If you are tired, this is harder to do, but just like anything, it's harder to do when you're tired. So you'll notice that you kind of lose center a lot easier when you haven't had enough sleep, or you're sort of close to burnout, or whatever. These are obviously the harder times to practice. So in a nutshell, sort of keep it short, keep your practice moments short. and use those moments to sort of observe what is happening in this relationship, so that you'll notice, because there are toxic people. We talked about this the very first time Peter had me on. There are toxic people. So you'll go 1, 2, 3, and you'll notice this person isn't really interested in finding a harmonious direction. So back off. That person will probably go to find somebody else to try it on with. But again, you need to, the basis of this is initially self-preservation. So you're preserving yourself, but you're also interested in preserving the other person. Does that answer your question, Margaret? Kind of.
Somewhat. It helps.
Yeah.
I think, and then I'll just make a follow-up statement. I think maybe what comes up for me is I hear a distinction when you're speaking between like practice, dedicated practice containers, and then the rest of wild reality, where it's not so clear, like this is what we're practicing. And now I find myself wondering, like, what are the moves for escaping, like conversational escape? And maybe that's something that will come up later, but just like when you do all those other things, and I hear you on the 3 times intent, that totally makes sense, like not flipping back, staying with it, and then like that, yes. But what are the moves for like, then once you do that, how do you escape a conversation where someone else just keeps throwing their energy at you and you no longer want to dodge it and invite other things?
Well,
So
again,
conversational escape.
yeah, I mean, everything about the practice is about intention. It always comes back to that same key idea. In other words, your intention is, of those 3 postures, to be able to be connected with what is your truth, what is happening within inside you, what are you feeling. That's key intention. The other 2 are to accompany the other person, is to actually sincerely want it. Sincerity is so key in this practice. If you're using the techniques without the sincerity of trying to understand and actually connect with that other person, then it's just going to come off as a parade or sort of some sort of a technique that you use. Whereas the core of the practice is to actually be able to connect with other people. You can use it to protect yourself from toxic people. Yep. And sort of encounters that you have to have because you're seeing that person over Christmas or whatever, or you have to work with that person, and you can manage them. So you can use it to sort of practice. You can use it to, I can say, to avoid getting hurt by people that actually that are interested in dominance. You do get sort of narcissistic personality types that exist. So they're actually try to sort of connect with people who are not interested in empathy or have a very hard time actually empathizing. It's going to be very hard to connect with those people because they have different goals, they have a different mindset. That said, it can help you sort of discern that very quickly, and again, take distance and give them the space that they need, but also give yourself that space. Does that get closer, Margaret?
It does. And I'll add one last thought before I stop talking, because I know we're over time and other people have questions and you might have to go. But what comes to mind when I hear you discuss this is co-regulation. That so much of what you're talking about in terms of the sincerity and intention aspect seems related to like conscious co-regulation of being with someone and that connection. And I think when I put it in that mindset, I'm hearing that my question is more about like, how do I stop co-regulating other people when I no longer feel safe? So that's maybe like a different thing for me to explore, but that was very useful, so thank you.
Okay, I think you found your answer. Yes, absolutely. Okay, really good. There is something I just did want to do just to finish up with today. I'm going to just share my screen, just again a little overview so people know what we did today. Let me just finish up with that, and then again, if you have any sort of final questions, please do throw them into the chat. But let me just finish up with what we did today. So, what was your takeaway? I hope it was at least something that comes up here. If not, if there's other stuff, please do share also in the chat. But what we looked at today, again, we sort of looked at that core concept review that we, a little deeper dive than we did on the first session. So we talked about what we do, we talked about why we do it, and we talked about how we do it. So that was, again, the key aspect of the practice, when it's useful, and again, how it actually works. So, and how we practice for it. So we did that activity today, which is called verbal stretching, which of course you can do. You can take it, do it with your friends, do it with your husband, your wife. But the core aspect that you're looking at is to self-observe. Notice yourself shifting from those movements, because that is what is key in practice, whether it's, again, on the mat. On the mat is just, if it helps you sort of understand how the practice works, just like a martial art. In other words, yes, when you start training for karate, for judo, for whatever it is, the first time it's going to feel a little bit awkward, but there is going to be that moment, if you stick with it, that your reflexes start to kick in, and you know, you're not going to be able to manage Bruce Lee if he attacked you, but you know, that the sort of general attacks that stay safe, that help you stay safe, that will, yeah, that the movements will help you stay safe in those critical times. So the verbal stretching, again, is not verbal Aikido practice, but it's how we get to warm up and how we start to recognize those key skills that are important on the mat. The techniques that we looked at today were step 2 techniques, which, again, I sort of emphasized a lot on, is sort of accompanying the other person, moving with that other person, which I kind of, as Sahil illustrated, if you do it too much, then if you're not able to sort of come back to that one posture, it can be frustrating for the other person. So you do need to be able to come quickly back to that one, or extend out for a 3, which we're going to look at next week. I've given you a variety of movements that all necessitate, I'm gonna get this word right, necessity. They need a sincere accompanying posture, which kind of rounds up what we're saying with Margaret. So that's it, guys, for today. I look forward to next week. If there are any other sort of final ones, please do share. Otherwise, it's back to you, Peter.
Yeah, I do have to leave, so we'll close out, but there was some good questions in the chat that maybe we can get to next time. So if you're here, feel free to come. Yeah, I'll share some closing reflections. It was funny when Sahil was like going after you, and it got kind of like tense at a certain moment. It's like my steward and caretaking, I was like holding myself back not to go in. This is like training at Dale Carnegie, you know, like when someone who kind of asks difficult questions, when it's the context is not right, or the time constraints are not there, then it's usually you do this like verbal jiu-jitsu move to kind of change the thing. And so I had a desire to do that, but then I'm like, oh wait, Luke is the master at this, so I just kind of like sit back. So that was cool.
Yeah, you can feel for that moment.
Yeah, and then 2 points came up, or 3 points. I do think there's a lot of transferable benefits. I've taken acting classes a lot when I was younger, and just sort of the emotional felt sense moves that you have to make in order to deal with difficult things, even if it's an acting environment, is transferable to kind of the wild. And I can see, just like nonviolent communication, like verbal Aikido can be, the method can be abused, and people can just do it like in a phony sort of way. And so having the discernment when to do it, I think, is right. And maybe you can push back on that if you don't agree. And then the last point that came up is sort of like, it's almost like a different psychotechnology needed for like cluster B engagement and discerning, or like narcissists or sociopaths. It's like, this might be like not a Pyrrhic victory kind of engaging in this conversation more. I should like back out. And that seems like something that could be associated with it. Anyway, so those are thoughts that came alive. I'm curious, anything that you'd like to add to that or close?
Just in closing, yes. Again, as we started to talk about, Margaret, where it can be beneficial in situations with, like I said, these people who, you know, you classify them as, I don't think we use sociopath sort of technically as a term, but people with personality disorders, basically. And these people with personality disorders very often have this lack of empathy, which is kind of a key part of our human nature, that helps us connect with others. So once you kind of develop the sense and start to recognize how it works with people who would be sort of deemed as normal, you actually do start to see where it doesn't work, and it doesn't work. But it doesn't work in the sense that you find it very difficult to connect with another person if your intention really is to connect. Whereas because you'll see that they'll shift out of it. They'll be incapable of sincerely trying to understand your position and sort of moves it like that. And once you start to recognize that, you start to go, okay, well, hold on, this is an abusive relationship? Hold on, you know, is this a relationship that I need to take a distance from? And, you know, it could be take distance from, regroup, get in, you know, get a few more sort of techniques that are, get a centering that really works for you so that you can re-engage with that person. But again, you know, what sort of relationship, again, you do need to start asking questions. What is the relationship that I am prepared to have with that person? And that is the kind of the core aspect of Aiki. What is the harmony that I am willing to, you know, go along with, to, you know, what frequency, what regularity, what you know, what I'm willing to give them myself in that relationship, so that I'm preserved and the other person's preserved too. But yeah, I guess key aspects of the practice are, again, always coming back to that center, searching to understand if it's not the person, it's the situation, and then seeing how we can sort of move forward and continue with that. But yeah, really interesting questions. Probably go into more depth the next week.
Very cool. Yeah, and I love this technique, Luke. And I find, like, if you get really good at it, it just affords so much social agency, and then you have discernment when to do these certain things. So thank you, my friend, for coming in today. Looking forward to the last session next week. And if you're interested, you can sign up for on the Patreon. And so thank you, everyone, for supporting the Stoa as well. That being said, we'll see you next time.
See you next week.
Awesome. Thank you.